Hey guys, Sniz here, and in this video we're going to be going over the Shot Deadeye that I've been playing in Expedition League. Now, before we get into the guide, big disclaimer. If you're someone who likes to push for level 100, this build probably isn't for you. This is definitely the definition of glass cannon. That being said, if you're okay with the idea of sacrificing a portal every few maps for a lot of speed and millions of single target DPS, I think you might like this one. Ice Shot is a bow attack that inherently converts 60% of its physical damage to cold damage. With some notables on the tree, we further convert the last 40% of physical damage to cold damage, ensuring that this build deals 100% pure cold damage. We further increase our damage by scaling a lot of cold damage, elemental damage with attacks, critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, and cold penetration. The Deadeye Ascendancy synergizes really well with this build, giving us a lot of quality of life as well as damage via additional projectiles, a free chain, a very powerful tailwind, and a lot of Sniper's Mark curse effect. Ice Shot also has a built-in shotgun mechanic. When an Ice Shot projectile hits an enemy, it creates a cone behind the enemy. If we introduce Hydrosphere into the build, this increases our single target quite significantly. If we position Hydrosphere correctly just in front of the boss, our projectiles hitting the Hydrosphere will create a cone behind the Hydrosphere, which is able to hit the boss, and then the projectile itself can either pierce or chain from the Hydrosphere, pretty much doubling our damage when it hits the boss again. Now, although most builds require a lot of investment to be endgame ready, this build can comfortably take on endgame with mostly unique gear pieces as showcased in the gearing section of this guide. For our first Deadeye Ascendancy, we take Gathering Winds, giving us Tailwind and a lot of extra Tailwind buff effect. Now, even if you already have Tailwind on some other piece, for example your boots, you would still want to take Gathering Wind as it can give us up to 150% increased Tailwind buff effect, which is massive for our speed and our single target. For our second Ascendancy, we take Ricochet, allowing our projectiles to chain an additional time and also giving them a slight chance to chain if they've collided with terrain. For our third Ascendancy, we take Endless Munitions, just giving us 2 additional Ice Shot projectiles. And finally, we take Focal Point, giving us 75% increased mark effect, which is absolutely massive for our single target since we use Sniper's Mark. This is what a level 95 tree would look like. So if we start at the top of the tree and work our way down, the tree consists of a lot of elemental damage, critical strike chance, critical strike multiplier, all the life nodes accessible to us in this part of the tree, a lot of attack speed. We also do scale frenzy charges since we have a way to generate frenzies in single target boss fights. Then as you can see, we use 2 Lionized Fall Jewels to convert this cluster right here and this cluster from claw nodes to bow nodes. Now if you're wondering why we're using 2, these 3 overlapping nodes, they gain a double benefit from using the 2 jewels. So as you can see, these 3 nodes provide massive damage to the build. We then pick up Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics since this is an evasion based build. We also use an Intuitive Leap to efficiently pick up some evade chance and elemental resistances, critical strike multiplier, accuracy and attack speed, and then we also just grab the life wherever we can. We pick up some more of these generic bow damage nodes. You could go for King of the Hill, although the knockback might break your damage, since we are using point blank. Then we need to convert 40% of our physical damage to cold. That's why we pick up Winter Spirit and the node leading up to it. Some more life. I only have Primal Spirit because I struggle with intelligence in this build. If you don't have any int requirements, then you can drop these 2 nodes and save some points. We then have some elemental damage with attacks and elemental penetration, generic bow crit nodes, life. Then we also grab Wind Dancer. Wind Dancer synergizes really well with acrobatics and phase acrobatics. Then we also have Point Blank. Since we need to position our Hydrosphere very specifically, we typically tend to stand close to the boss, and this gives us a lot more damage. We also have Frostfangs, and then we have 1 large cluster and 2 medium clusters. For the large cluster of this build, we use an 8 passive cold damage, with the most important notable being Blanketed Snow. This is the one that you want to prioritize, and even if you only get an 8 passive with 1 notable, you want to be sure that it's Blanketed Snow. Apart from that, you want to have Prismatic Heart as the second prefix, and then for your suffix, Disorienting Display, Widespread Destruction, or Doriani's Lesson would all work fine. Now, fair warning, buying a 3 notable 8 passive cold damage with Blanketed Snow will be extremely expensive, So what I've done in many builds is instead of getting a 3 notable, I would just get a 2 notable with Blanketed Snow and any other suffixes. For our first medium, we want to pick up a 4 or 5 passive projectile damage medium cluster with the notables Eye to Eye and Repeater. For our second medium cluster, we want to pick up a 4 or 5 passive critical strike chance medium cluster, with the perfect notables being Pressure Points and Precise Commander. But Quick Getaway and Basics of Pain would work just fine as well. So to showcase that you don't need the expensive versions of each gear piece that I recommend in this section of the guide for the build to be functional, I've swapped out my expensive bow, chest piece and gloves for the budget versions that I'll recommend, and I've decided to do an Awakener 9 White Phoenix to show you the difference between the two. So first off, this is a White Phoenix using my good endgame gear. And here is a Phoenix using the budget unique bow and chest piece and non-frostbite implicit gloves. As you can see, this build is still capable of doing the endgame quite comfortably without the need for extremely expensive rare items. The budget version of the bow that we use in this build is the Death's Opus unique bow. This is a prophecy upgrade version of the Death's Harp, and this bow is extremely good and will take you through most of the endgame quite comfortably. If you want to go a little bit further and invest more money into your bow, you'd want to go for a very high physical damage bow, with the modifier Bow Attacks Fire plus 2 additional projectiles. This bow would preferably be on a spine bow base. For our quiver, we use the unique quiver Void Fletcher, which is just an all-round really good quiver for cold bow attack builds. If you want to go further and invest more money to get more damage, you could go for a Void Fletcher with the Corrupted Implicit, Bow Attacks Fire an additional projectile. For the Helm slot, we use the Asenath's Chant. This triggers our Hydrosphere and our Sniper's Mark. The best in slot Helm enchant would be Sniper's Mark, has 30% increased buff effect. For our body armor, a good budget unique option is the Hyri's Ire, adding a lot of flat cold damage to our bow attacks, also giving us a little bit of attack and spell dodge. For an endgame version of the body armor, we'd want to go for a Hunter Redeemer Rare, preferably evasion-based armor piece. With the modifiers, you can apply an additional curse, you have 10% chance to gain Frenzy on hit, and preferably elevated attack critical strike chance. For the glove slot, you want to use rare gloves with the Incursion modifier, increase damage with hits against chilled enemies. Apart from that, you just want some life and resistances. Now, if you do have an additional cursed chest piece, you'd want to pick up a rare glove with the Synthesized Implicit, curse enemies with frostbite on hit. For boots, a very budget option is just to use rare boots with life resistances and 30% increased movement speed. Now, if you do want to go for endgame boots, you'd want to go for Elusive Onslaught rare boots. Now, if you already have Tailwind Elusive Onslaught rare boots, it's not that big of a loss since the build already generates Tailwind, but I wouldn't go out of my way to recraft boots if you already have a good pair of endgame boots. They would work just fine. For the amulet slot, we use the unique amulet, the Pandemonious. This gives a lot of cold damage, but it also gives a lot of cold resist penetration. This is all around just an extremely good amulet to use on cold damage builds. We anoint Heart of Ice as it gives cold damage, cold penetration, and a little bit of cold damage leeched as energy shield. It's a relatively expensive anoint as it costs a Crimson Oil, an Opalescent Oil, and a Golden Oil. For the ring slot, a really good budget and unique option is using the Taming unique rings. Now, these rings give a lot of elemental damage with attacks and elemental damage, but they also give a lot of elemental resistances, which are quite hard to come by in this build. Initially, on a budget, I would just use 2 of these Taming rings. Now, as your gear becomes better and better and you're not too reliant on the tamings for resistances anymore, you could switch one of them out for a Circle of Fear with the modifiers increased cold damage while affected by Herald of Ice, and increased Herald of Ice buff effect. If your build has an additional cursed chest piece but you were unable to find an implicit frostbite on hit glove, you could consider switching out the Circle of Fear for just a rare ring with the Redeemer modifier, curse enemies with frostbite on hit. For the belt slot, a good option for if you're struggling with life and resistances would just be to use a rare Stygian Vice with life resistances and craft it on elemental damage with attacks. Good unique options would be the Bisco's Leash for a little bit more speed and a Torrent's Reclamation for speed and damage. And then finally, the one item that is forbidden to mention in any build guide ever would of course be the Headhunter. This belt is extremely hard to get and extremely expensive to buy, but makes this build feel absolutely amazing to play. For unique jewels, we use 2 Lionized Fold jewels as seen in the tree section of this guide. I recommend you get these with the Corrupted Implicit 1% reduced reservation of skills, as they are quite cheap to buy in Trade League. Then apart from that, we also use an Intuitive Leap, and then finally we use a Watcher's Eye. Now, the best in slot Watcher's Eye mod would be increased critical strike chance while affected by hatred, but these can be quite expensive, so getting the flat cold damage or the cold penetration while affected by hatred Watcher's Eyes would work just as well. The remaining jewel slots are used to fix whatever the build needs. If you need life, get some life. If you need resistances, get some resistances. If you need stats, get some stats. If everything else has been sorted and your build is functional, and you want more damage, try to get as much critical strike multiplier as possible for the applicable skill. For the flasks, the first flask that I recommend is that you get an instant life flask. And then secondly, I recommend you get an enduring mana flask. Now, this really depends on whether you feel this is necessary. Thanks to Leech, we don't struggle with mana on single target boss fights, but sometimes in maps you attack once or twice without hitting any enemies, and then you're out of mana. I like that extra comfort feeling of knowing that I'd be able to flame dash if needed, thanks to this mana flask. Then we use the Dying Sun unique flask. This flask gives us +2 additional projectiles during flask effect, which is absolutely massive for single target, and I really do recommend you only use this in boss fights. Then we also use a Quicksilver flask for some extra movement speed, and an ample Diamond flask of Order. This specific flask gives us a ton of crit chance, boosting our damage by quite a bit. Now, if you're not using the Mana Flask, an Atziri's Promise or a Taste of Hate would both give you a lot of extra DPS. And if you have one, replacing your Diamond Flask with a Bottled Faith would increase your damage even further. As for how to further roll your flasks with Enkindling or Instilling Orbs, this is completely dependent on how you play the video game. I personally prefer to be able to press my flasks manually when I want them to be pressed, but then I do have my Dying Sun and my Diamond Flask triggered when I hit a rare or unique enemy. So in this build we have 2 6-links. The one 6-link setup is purely used for map clear, and the second one is purely used for single target boss fights. So if we start off with the map clear 6-link, we start off with as high a level possible Eye Shot, link to Mirage Archer support, link to Chain support, link to added cold damage support, link to elemental damage with attack support, link to inspiration support. Now, upgrading the applicable supports to their awakened versions would add damage, but this is not as important in the clear speed setup. Onto the single target 6-link, we start off with an Eye Shot, preferably once again level 21, linked to a Barrage support, linked to an added cold damage support, linked to a cold penetration support, linked to an elemental damage with attack support, linked to inspiration support. Now, in your single target setup, it is recommended that you try and upgrade added cold damage, cold penetration, and elemental damage with attack supports to their awakened variants to add a lot more damage. Furthermore, swapping out inspiration support for anomalous inspiration support should increase crit chance, which in return would increase single target DPS. Then, apart from that, just upgrading the levels and quality of your support gems will also boost the damage. For the auras of this build, we use Hatred, Herald of Ice, and Precision, all of them linked to an Enlighten. Now, I was able to only use an Enlighten level 3 and have no mana problems because I used a 1% reduced reservation Lionized Fold jewel. If you are unable to get one of these jewels, you might want to consider getting an Enlighten 4, although these can be quite expensive. Our helmet, the Asenath's Chant, triggers socketed skills when we use a bow attack. So, in our helmet we have a Sniper's Mark, preferably at least level 20, quality 20, linked to a Hydra Sphere, linked to Power Charge and Critical Strike Chance support, only level up this support as far as your int would allow, linked to as high as possible level enhanced support, as this increases our damage via Sniper's Mark quite significantly. And then for our final 4 link, we have Blood Rage, linked to Flame Dash, linked to Portal, linked to as high a level possible Enhance, as Enhance increases the benefits from all 3 of the applicable gems. Now for Blood Rage, you do have the option of going for Anomalous Blood Rage, as it helps generate frenzy charges against single target boss fights, but if you already have frenzy on hit from your chest piece, this isn't as important to get. Now onto Pantheons. For the Major God, I recommend you take the Soul of Lunaris, as it synergizes really well with our ranged evasion based build. And then for the Minor God, I recommend you take the Soul of Shikari to help deal with chaos damage and caustic ground, or the Soul of Abrath to make you unaffected by burning ground. For the Bandit choice, I recommend you go with Eramir for the 2 extra passive skill points, but if you're struggling to cap your resistances, going with Alira for the extra elemental resistances, critical strike multiplier and mana regen while you upgrade your gear is also a valid choice. Now, unfortunately with how this build is set up, this isn't really League start friendly. So when you want to play this build, I really do recommend that you have most of the gear pieces ready. As for leveling, I used Ice Shot to level throughout the whole campaign, and these are the recommended uniques used for leveling. And that's pretty much it for the guide. You now have all the info you need to replicate this build. I've been having an absolute blast mapping and bossing with this build, and I hope that you do too. But anyway, that's it from me. My name is Sniz, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye. Ooh, I heard a Schling. Is that a 6th link or an Exalted Orb? It's probably a 6th link. God damn it, dude. Pain champ. Oh, but there's the Exalted Orb. Wait, Pog. Excuse me?